They all believed Kira Ashwood had stolen her position. A kitchen girl elevated beyond her station. A servant with a gift for reading old texts that no healer needed to read. The kind of quiet girl who could stand in the archive wing of Thornwall Keep and leave behind nothing except organized records, correct translations, and the persistent rumor that she had slept her way into comfort. Kira preferred the rumors to the truth. Being underestimated was safer than being remembered. Safer than someone asking why a common girl could read scripts that predated the kingdom. Safer than anyone noticing that the faded marks on her mother's execution parchment matched the birthmark hidden beneath Kira's left shoulder blade. For 12 years, she had lived inside Thornwall Keep with her head down and a half-truth on her tongue. She was Kira Ashwood, foundling, raised by the archive master after her mother died of fever. She had learned her letters early. She had a talent for translation. She was useful, nothing more. She was not the daughter of Elara Velthane, executed blood scribe. She was not the last living person who could read the Crimson Chronicles without dying. She was not the girl the Old Kingdom had tried to drown in a frozen lake 12 winters ago. And then Prince Kaelin, the Alpha King's only living son, began to die in a way no healer could name. The throne room had never been used for healing before. It was a place for pronouncements, judgments, and the kind of royal theater that required marble floors and 40 feet of vertical space to feel sufficiently important. But that morning, when Prince Kaelin collapsed during a tribute ceremony, the king had him carried to the dais rather than the healing wing. Kira learned this secondhand from a steward who grabbed her arm in the archive and said the king wanted every translator in the keep, immediately. She did not ask why. Asking questions made people notice you, and being noticed was a luxury Kira could not afford. She simply followed him down 3 flights of stairs, through the main hall, and into the throne room where half the royal court had gathered in a silence so heavy it felt like drowning. Prince Kaelin lay on the stone dais, small and gray beneath a crimson banner. He was 13 years old enough to know fear when he saw it on every face around him. Too young for the spreading black stain that had appeared across his chest that morning, a mark that looked like ink but smelled like rot. Around him, 5 court physicians stood in cream robes with empty hands and identical expressions of polished helplessness. Kira stood near the archive table someone had dragged into the room, holding a stack of old medical texts that would be useless here. She should not have been there. Not this close to the throne. Not this close to the king. Not this close to anything that mattered. Her job was to translate when scholars needed words, to find precedents when lawyers needed arguments, to sit in dusty corners and make dead languages useful to living people who would never remember her name. But that morning, with the prince dying and the court watching, someone had decided perhaps an old text might save him. It would not. Kira knew that the moment she saw the mark. High Physician Corvin Thale stood beside the dais, his silver hair perfect, his expression grave, his voice measured as he addressed the king. "We have tried every known remedy, Your Majesty." The mark spreads despite intervention. Alpha King Dristan Ashbourne did not sit on his throne. He stood beside his son, one hand on the boy's shoulder, and looked at Corvin with the kind of stillness that made lesser wolves bare their throats without being asked. "Then find an unknown remedy," the king said. "Your Majesty, with respect, this is beyond the realm of healing. The mark is not illness. It is inscription." A murmur rolled through the assembled court. Inscription. That meant blood magic. That meant intent. That meant someone had marked the prince to die, and every healer in the keep could do nothing except watch it happen. Kira's fingers tightened on the texts in her arms. The books were old, yes, but not the right kind of old. What Corvin was describing required texts that predated the kingdom, texts written in blood script, the language banned 2 generations ago because reading it required the reader's blood to activate the words on the page. Most people who tried to read blood script died. Their veins turned black, their eyes bled. The words consumed them from the inside because they did not carry the bloodline that could hold the language. Kira's mother had carried that bloodline. So did Kira. "Bring forward the translators," the king said. 3 scholars stepped forward. Master Halven, who specialized in legal precedent. Scholar Mira, who knew medicinal dialects. Master Tormund, who could read 6 languages but grew faint at the sight of blood. And Kira, who had been dragged from the archive because apparently when princes were dying, even kitchen girls who knew their letters became useful. Corvin gestured to a parchment on the table beside the throne. It had been placed there with the careful distance people used for poisonous things. This was found beneath the prince's pillow. We believe it is the source of the mark. Kira could not see the parchment from where she stood, but she could smell it. Old leather, dried blood, something bitter that made her throat close. Blood script. Master Halvan approached the parchment first. He leaned over it, squinting at the text, then straightened and cleared his throat. I cannot read this, Your Majesty. The script is archaic. Pre-kingdom, possibly. Scholar Mira tried next. She lasted longer, her finger tracing the first line before she stepped back with her hand pressed to her mouth. Forgive me, Your Majesty. The language makes me ill. Master Tormund did not even try. He looked at the parchment, went pale, and said he would need better light. The king's gaze swept the room and landed on Kira. She felt it like a hand around her throat. Not cruel, not angry, just absolute. You, he said, the archive girl. Can you read this? Every eye in the throne room turned to her. Kira's pulse hammered against her ribs. She could lie. She should lie. Lying had kept her alive for 12 years. But Prince Kaelin made a small, broken sound, and lying stopped being an option. Yes, Your Majesty, Kira said quietly. The court shifted. Someone whispered. Corvin's eyes narrowed with an expression Kira recognized from years of being underestimated and occasionally resented. He did not believe her. That was fine. People rarely did until it was too late. Read it, the king said. Kira crossed the room. Each step felt longer than the last. The texts in her arms grew heavier. By the time she reached the table, her hands were shaking. But she set the books down carefully, because dropping things in front of the Alpha King seemed like poor strategy. The parchment lay flat on the table, edges curled, surface stained. The script was written in dried blood, as blood script always was. The letters twisted in patterns that would look like decoration to anyone who did not know how to see them. Kira knew. Her mother had taught her in a cold stone room the night before she died, whispering the shapes into Kira's memory while soldiers searched the floors above them. Read it aloud, Corvin said, his voice sharp. Kira ignored him. Reading blood script aloud could activate inscriptions meant to be dormant. If this parchment was designed to kill, speaking the words would finish what had been started. Instead, she leaned closer. Let her eyes trace the first line. Let the old language rise in her mind like a half-remembered song. The letters shifted, not on the page, in her sight. They moved, rearranging themselves into comprehensible patterns, and Kira felt the familiar burn behind her eyes that came from reading words written in blood. She forced herself to breathe through it, to read past the burn, to see what the inscription said. When she understood, her blood went cold. Well? The king asked. Kira straightened slowly. It is a death mark, Your Majesty. The court erupted. Voices rose. Someone shouted. A woman near the back fainted with impressive timing. The king raised one hand, and the room fell silent instantly. Explain, he said. The inscription binds the prince's life to a condition, Kira said. Her voice did not shake. That felt like a small miracle. As long as the condition remains unmet, the mark will spread. When it reaches his heart, he will die. What condition? Kira looked at the parchment again. At the second line, written smaller, almost hidden in the decorative border. The mark will only stop if the one who wrote it confesses their crime before the throne. Silence. Then the king's voice, colder than Kira had ever heard it. Someone in this room tried to murder my son. The court recoiled. Nobles stepped back from one another. Guards moved closer to the throne. Corvin's face remained perfectly composed, but Kira saw his hand twitch once inside his sleeve. Prince Kaelin's eyes opened. Pale gray, unfocused, glazed with pain and something worse. His head turned slowly until he was looking past the king, past Corvin, past every noble in the room, directly at Kira. That was impossible. Dying boys looked for their fathers, their mothers, their gods if the night had been cruel. But Kaelin's gaze fixed on Kira as if she were the only real thing left in a room full of shadows. His lips moved. No sound came. Then, in a whisper that somehow carried across the marble floor, he said, "She knows." Kira went very still. "Who knows?" the king asked, but his son had already closed his eyes. The king turned to Kira. His expression had not changed, but something in the air around him thickened. What does he mean? I do not know, Your Majesty. You read the inscription. Yes, Your Majesty. Can you remove it? Kira looked at the prince, at the black marks spreading across his chest like spilled ink, at his small hands curled against the cold stone, at the way his breathing hitched every few seconds, shallow and wrong. No, she said. Only confession will break it. That is the nature of blood script. The words bind intent to consequence. Whoever wrote this did so with their own blood. Only their truth can unmake it. The king stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the assembled court. This room is sealed. No one leaves until my son is saved. Guards moved to block the doors. Nobles began to protest. The king silenced them with a single look. Corvin, he said, examine everyone. Find out who is bleeding. It was a clever thought. Blood script required the writer to open a vein. Fresh blood worked best. Whoever had written the inscription would likely still carry the wound. But it was also wrong. Kira knew this because her mother had explained it once, her voice tired, her hands bloody from the work that would get her killed 3 days later. Blood scribes heal fast, little star. We have to. The language takes from us every time we use it. If we did not heal, we would have bled out generations ago. Corvin began his examination. He moved through the court methodically, checking hands, wrists, forearms. Nobles submitted with varying degrees of indignation. Guards endured with stone faces. Scholars looked uncomfortable but compliant. No one bled. An hour passed. Then 2. Prince Kaelin's breathing grew shallower. The mark spread another inch. The king stood beside the dais, unmoving, his hand still on his son's shoulder. Kira stood beside the archive table, watching, and tried very hard not to let anyone see how fast her heart was beating. Because she knew something no one else in this room knew. The inscription on the parchment had been written in old blood. Very old blood. Blood that had been stored, preserved, kept alive through alchemical means for years, maybe decades. Which meant the person who wrote it did not need to be bleeding today. They only needed access to blood that had been bled long ago. Kira's gaze drifted to the archive table, to the stack of old texts she had carried down, to the medical histories and legal precedents that no one had asked her to translate. And beneath those books, barely visible, the corner of something else. A smaller parchment, folded, stained. Kira's throat tightened. That had not been in her stack when she left the archive. Someone had placed it there while she was reading the death mark. Someone had slipped it into her books while every eye was on the prince. She should not look at it. She should not touch it. She should do what she had done for 12 years. Keep her head down, stay quiet, and survive. But Prince Kaelin was dying, and Kira had spent 12 years carrying her mother's ghost like a weight around her throat. She reached for the folded parchment. The moment her fingers touched it, the room went cold. Not gradually, not gently. One breath, the throne room was warm with bodies and tension, and the next it was winter cold, the kind that made breath fog and skin prickle. Someone screamed. Kira looked up. Prince Kaelin was sitting upright on the dais, his eyes open but wrong. Too bright, too aware, glowing with a pale silver light that had no source. The blood scribe's daughter, he said, in a voice that was his and also was not, stands in the throne room. Every wolf in the room inhaled. Kira did not move, did not breathe, did not let herself think. Because she had heard that voice before, 12 years ago, in a courtroom that smelled like smoke and fear, in the moment before they dragged her mother to the drowning lake. The old language calls to her, the prince continued, his glowing eyes fixed on Kira. The blood remembers even when the girl forgets. Kaelin, the king said, his voice tight. But his son did not seem to hear him. One among you wrote death in blood. One among you carries the guilt. The blood scribe's daughter sees what you cannot. Let her show you. Then the prince collapsed. The glow vanished. The cold lifted. Kaelin lay unconscious on the dais, breathing too fast, his small body shaking. And every eye in the throne room turned to Kira. She stood with the folded parchment in her hand, her pulse roaring in her ears, and knew there was no more hiding. Your Majesty, Corvin said, his voice carefully measured. The girl must be questioned. Why? The king asked without looking away from Kira. The prince named her. He named her Bloodline, not her crime. Bloodscribe families were outlawed for treason. She has concealed her heritage. That alone is a capital offense. Kira's fingers tightened on the parchment. Corvin was right. Bloodscribes had been outlawed after the Crimson Trials, when the Old Kingdom fell and the new one rose on laws written specifically to prevent anyone with Bloodscribe blood from ever holding power again. Her mother had been executed for refusing to burn the last Bloodscript archives. Kira had survived only because the Master Archivist had lied and said she was an orphan he had taken in after a fever epidemic. A fever that conveniently killed everyone who knew her real name. "Open the parchment," the king said. Kira looked at him, at the stillness in his frame, at the control that did not waver even as his son lay dying and his court turned to whispers. She unfolded the parchment. Inside, written in faded ink, was a list of names. Bloodscribe families. All of them. Every lineage executed during the Crimson Trials. And beside each name, a small notation. A date. A location. A record of where their blood had been stored after their deaths. Kira's hands shook. "Read it," the king said, and this time it was not a request. "They are records, Your Majesty, of Bloodscribe executions, and of the blood taken from them afterward." "Why would such records exist?" "Because your father ordered them made," Kira thought, but did not say. "Because every Bloodscribe executed was bled before they died, and their blood was preserved in case the kingdom ever needed it. Her mother had told her this in the cold room, had warned her that the blood would be used, had begged her to never let them know she existed. "The blood was kept for alchemical research, Your Majesty," Corvin said smoothly. "To study the properties of bloodscript without risking living practitioners. Perfectly legal." Kira looked at him, at the perfect calm of his face, at the way his hands rested at his sides, relaxed, confident, at the small faded mark on his left wrist that no one else could see from this angle. A burn scar, the kind made by old blood igniting on skin that was not prepared for it. "You wrote the death mark," Kira said. The room went silent. Corvin smiled. It was a small smile. Polite. Almost kind. "The girl is frightened. She is grasping for answers." "You have a burn scar on your wrist," Kira said. "Fresh bloodscript burns when it touches unprepared skin. Old blood burns worse. I am a physician. I have many scars." "Show him, Your Majesty." The king's gaze flicked to Corvin's wrist. "Show me." Corvin did not move. "This is absurd. I am the High Physician. I have served the crown for 20 years. "Show me your wrist, Corvin." For one breath, Corvin remained still. Then his hand moved, not to his sleeve, but to his belt, where a small vial hung on a silver chain. He uncapped it. Kira recognized the smell before anyone else did. Preserved blood, old blood, blood that had been kept alive through alchemy and intent. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," Corvin said, and threw the vial's contents at the king. Everything happened too fast. The blood hit the king's chest. Blackness spread from the point of impact like spilled ink, the same mark that was killing Prince Kalen, now crawling across the Alpha King's skin. Guards shouted. Nobles screamed. Someone ran for the door and found it still sealed. And Corvin, moving faster than a man his age should move, crossed the room toward Kira. She did not think. She reacted. Kira slammed her palm down on the archive table, directly onto the deathmark inscription, and felt her blood rise. She had not used her gift in 12 years, had not let the old language touch her veins or the burn ignite behind her eyes, had kept it buried so deep she had almost convinced herself it was dead. It was not dead. Her blood roared to life, the burn in her eyes became fire, and the words on the deathmark parchment began to move, not on the page, in the air. The letters lifted from the parchment in threads of black smoke, twisting, reforming, responding to the command Kira had not spoken aloud but had screamed inside her mind with 12 years of suppressed fury. The smoke lashed toward Corvin. He stopped, stared, then laughed, sharp and breathless. "You cannot undo what I wrote. The inscription is bound." "No," Kira said, and her voice did not sound like her own, "but I can rewrite it. Bloodscript was language. Language could be changed. Words could be unmade and remade. Intent could be redirected. All it required was blood and will. Kira had both. She pressed her left hand to the mark on her shoulder blade. the birthmark she had hidden for 12 years, and felt it burn, felt it open, felt her blood rise to the surface, hot and ready. Then she pressed that same hand back to the parchment. The smoke turned crimson, the letters reformed, and the inscription that had been written to kill now became something else. A confession. The smoke wrapped around Corvin like chains. He tried to pull free, but the words tightened, crawling up his arms, across his chest, around his throat. "What did you do?" he gasped. "I changed the condition," Kira said. "The mark will not release until you confess your crime." Aloud, before the throne. Corvin's face twisted. He opened his mouth, closed it, fought the words rising in his throat. But Bloodscript did not care about pride. It only cared about truth. "I wrote the death mark," he said, the words tearing out of him. "I used preserved blood from Alara Velthane's execution. I placed it beneath the prince's pillow. I intended him to die." The black mark on Prince Kaelin's chest flickered, then faded, then vanished. The boy gasped. His eyes opened, gray and clear and alive. The mark on the king's chest disappeared as well, the blackness dissolving like smoke in wind. Corvin fell to his knees, the crimson smoke still wrapped around him, binding him in place. The throne room was silent. Then Alpha King Dristan Ashbourne stepped down from the dais, crossed to where Kira stood, and looked at her with an expression she could not read. "You are the daughter of Alara Velthane," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, Your Majesty." "You are a blood scribe." "Yes, Your Majesty." He was silent for a long moment. Then he looked at the crimson smoke binding Corvin, at the reformed inscription still glowing faintly in the air, at the way Kira's hands shook despite the control she was forcing into her spine. "Why did you hide?" he asked. Kira met his gaze. "Because 12 years ago, your father drowned my mother in a frozen lake for refusing to destroy the last Bloodscript archive. Because blood scribes are outlawed. Because I was 7 years old and had just watched soldiers drag her away while she screamed my name." The king's expression did not change, and yet you stayed, in the keep, under a false name. "The master archivist saved me. He lied. He said I was an orphan from a fever epidemic. He taught me to hide, to survive, to be useful enough to keep but quiet enough to forget." "Useful," the king repeated. He looked at his son, breathing steadily on the dais, alive. Then back at Kira. "You saved Kaelin. I rewrote an inscription. Your Majesty. That is what blood scribes do." "And Corvin? Why did he want my son dead?" Kira looked at the high physician, still bound in crimson smoke, his face twisted with rage and something darker. "I do not know, but he used my mother's blood to do it. Blood taken from her after she died. Blood preserved in the royal archives." The king's gaze sharpened. "How do you know?" "The records." Kira held up the folded parchment she had found hidden in her books. "Someone left this for me. A list of blood scribe families and where their blood was stored. My mother's blood was kept in the high physician's laboratory. I had permission," Corvin spat, "for research, for alchemical study. The late king authorized it." "Did he authorize murder?" Corvin did not answer. The king studied him for a long moment. Then he looked at the guards. "Take him to the cells. Question him. Find out why." The guards moved forward. The crimson smoke released Corvin, dissolving into nothing, and the high physician was dragged from the throne room without ceremony. The court remained silent, watching, waiting. The king turned back to Kira. "By law, you should be arrested. Blood scribes are outlawed. Concealing your bloodline is a capital offense." Kira said nothing. There was nothing to say. He was right. However, the king continued, "You saved my son's life. You exposed a traitor in my own court. And you did so using a gift that, by every law in this kingdom, should have seen you executed before you learned to speak." He stepped closer. Close enough that Kira could smell smoke and cold iron and something deeper, something that made her instincts scream run even as her body refused to move. "I am changing the law," he said. The court erupted. Voices rose in protest. Several nobles shouted. A council member stepped forward, red-faced, demanding procedure. The king raised one hand, and the room fell silent with the speed of a door slamming shut. "Bloodscribe prohibition is hereby suspended pending formal review. Kira Ashwood, daughter of Ilara Velthane, is granted provisional freedom under Crown protection. She will assist in the investigation of High Physician Corvin Thale and the misuse of preserved Bloodscribe remains. Anyone who touches her answers to me. He looked at Kira. Is that acceptable? Kira's throat was too tight to answer immediately. She forced herself to breathe, to think past the fear and the fury and the weight of 12 years lifting all at once. Yes, Your Majesty, she managed. Good. He turned to address the court. This room is no longer sealed. You may leave. But know this. If any harm comes to the Bloodscribe under my protection, I will consider it an act of treason. Nobles fled. Scholars scattered. Guards remained at their posts, stone-faced and obedient. Prince Kalen sat up on the dais, pale but alive, and looked at Kira with those clear gray eyes. Thank you, he said simply. Kira's chest ached. You are welcome, Your Highness. The boy smiled. Then his father was there, helping him stand, one hand on his shoulder in that same steady grip that seemed to be the king's only outward expression of feeling anything at all. But Kira saw the way his hand shook, just once, just for a breath. And she understood. Alpha King Dristan Ashbourne had spent the last 2 hours watching his only child die and being helpless to stop it. That did things to a person, even a king. Come, the king said to Kira. We have much to discuss. She followed him from the throne room, her hands still shaking, her blood still singing with the aftershock of using her gift after 12 years of silence. Behind her, the court whispered. Bloodscribe, traitor's daughter, forbidden, alive. For the first time in 12 years, Kira Ashwood did not care what they called her. Her mother's name had been cleared in death, her gift had been used to save rather than destroy, and she had stood in the throne room of the kingdom that had drowned her mother and rewritten the words that would have killed its prince. That felt like enough. The investigation took 3 days, and every hour of it felt like walking through a house where all the doors were locked from the inside. The first day, Kira worked alone in the Royal Archive, surrounded by guards who watched her as if she might explode into smoke at any moment. Perhaps they were not wrong to worry. Her blood still sang with the aftershock of using her gift after 12 years of forced silence, and every time she touched a Bloodscript text, her fingers trembled with the urge to rewrite something, anything, just to feel the power move through her again. She resisted. Power without purpose was indulgence. Her mother had taught her that in the cold room her voice steady even as boots thundered overhead. The language is not a toy, little star. Every word you write in blood has consequence. Every mark you make reshapes the world. Choose carefully, or you become the monster they claim we are. Kira had chosen carefully for 12 years. She would continue to choose carefully now, even when her instincts screamed at her to burn every record that carried her mother's name and start fresh. Instead, she read, the Blood Archive records were kept in the sublevel beneath the royal treasury, sealed behind 3 locked doors and a ward that made Kira's skin crawl when she approached it. The king had granted her access with a signed order and a warning that the ward would only recognize her once. If she left the room, she would need his permission to return. It was a test, Kira realized, not of her loyalty, of her control. If she panicked, if she fled, if she proved unable to face what had been done to her people, then the king's protection would mean nothing. The court would see her as weak, fragile, a broken thing to be pitied rather than respected. Kira did not flee. She descended the stone stairs with 2 guards at her back, crossed through the warded door, and stepped into a room that smelled like preserved death. Glass vials lined the walls, hundreds of them, each labeled with a name, a date, and a notation of how much blood had been extracted. Some vials were full, others were half empty, their contents already used for purposes Kira could only guess at. She recognized her mother's name on the 3rd shelf. The vial beside it was nearly empty. Only a few drops remained, dark and thick and old. Kira's hands clenched at her sides. She forced herself to breathe through the rage rising in her chest. Later, she would grieve later. Right now, she needed to think. The vials were organized by date of execution, not by family name. That told her something. Whoever had created this archive cared more about when the blood was collected than whose blood it was. They were building a timeline, not a genealogy. Kira pulled a blank parchment from her satchel and began to copy names. dates, notations. The guards watched her work with expressions that suggested they were deeply uncomfortable being in a room full of dead people's blood, but were too disciplined to say so. She did not blame them. 3 hours later, she had filled 5 pages with records. The pattern was clear. Bloodscribe executions had peaked during a 3-year period under the late king's reign, then dropped off sharply. Not because bloodscribes stopped being executed, because there were no more bloodscribes left to kill, except Kira. And her mother had been the last, which meant the final vial in this archive, the one containing Alara Velthane's blood, was the only remaining source of active bloodscript material in the kingdom. Kira looked at the nearly empty glass, at the few drops left inside. Corvin had used most of it to write the death mark on Prince Kaelin, but not all of it. There were still drops remaining, enough for 1 more inscription, maybe 2 if the writer was skilled enough to stretch it. Kira's stomach turned cold. "I need to speak with the king," she said. The guards exchanged glances. Now? They brought her to the king's war room, a space she had never seen before, lined with maps and weapons, and a single table scarred with decades of strategic planning. The king stood with his back to the door, studying a map of the kingdom's borders. He did not turn when Kira entered. "You found something," he said. It was not a question. "The blood archive is nearly depleted, Your Majesty. Most vials are empty or low, but my mother's vial is the last one with active blood remaining." "How much?" "Enough for 1 or 2 more inscriptions." The king's shoulders tensed. Then he turned, his expression carefully controlled, but Kira saw the calculation behind his eyes. Corvin used it for the death mark. What else might he have written? "I do not know, but if there are other inscriptions already in place, we will not find them unless they activate. And by then it may be too late." "Yes, Your Majesty." The king crossed to the table, braced his hands against its edge, and was silent for a long moment. Then he looked at Kira with an intensity that made her pulse quicken despite herself. "Can you track it?" he asked. "The blood. If Corvin or anyone else used it to write inscriptions, would you be able to follow the trail?" Kira hesitated. Tracking blood script was possible, in theory. Her mother had mentioned it once, in passing, as something the old bloodscribes had done during the wars that predated the kingdom. But it required a connection to the blood itself, a link. A resonance that only those who shared the bloodline could feel. "I can try," she said carefully. "What do you need?" "Access to Corvin. And a sample of my mother's remaining blood." The king's gaze sharpened. "Why Corvin?" "Because if he wrote other inscriptions, his intent will be embedded in them. Intent leaves a residue. If I can match the residue to his presence, I can confirm whether there are hidden marks waiting to activate. And if there are, then I will need to find them before they kill someone else." The king studied her for a moment longer. Then he nodded. "You will have access to both. But Corvin is dangerous, even in chains. Do not underestimate him." "I spent 12 years being underestimated, Your Majesty. I know how dangerous it is." Something almost like a smile crossed the king's face. Brief. Gone before Kira could be certain she had seen it. "Go. Do what you must. I will have the guards escort you." Kira left the war room with her heart beating too fast and her hands steady only through sheer force of will. She was about to face the man who had used her mother's blood to try to murder a child. She needed to be calm. She needed to be controlled. She needed to remember that vengeance was not the same as justice, no matter how badly she wanted to rewrite Corvin's tongue into silence. The cells beneath Thornwall Keep were cold, damp, and smelled like despair with a faint note of rotting straw. Corvin sat in the farthest cell, chained to the wall, his silver hair matted, his physician's robes stained and torn. He looked up when Kira approached, and his expression shifted from wary to amused in the space of a breath. "The bloodscribe's daughter," he said. "Come to gloat?" "No," Kira said. "Come to ask questions." "How refreshing. Most people who visit me down here prefer threats." He rattled his chains once. "Though I admit, threats have more entertainment value." Kira did not rise to the bait. She pulled a small glass vial from her satchel, the one the king had authorized her to take from the archive. Her mother's blood, the last remaining drops. Corvin's eyes fixed on it immediately. "Ah," he said softly. "You brought a gift." "I brought a tool. One you used to write a death mark. among other things. Kira went still. What other things? Corvin smiled. It was not a kind expression. Do you really think I would put all my effort into one inscription? One prince? One attempt? I have been planning for 20 years, girl. The death mark was simply the most visible piece. Tell me what else you wrote. Why should I? Because if you do not, I will track the inscriptions myself, and when I find them, I will rewrite them to bind you instead. Corvin's smile faded. You would not. That would violate your precious principles. Try me. They stared at each other across the bars of the cell. Kira held the vial where he could see it, watched his gaze flick to it, again and again, like a man staring at water while dying of thirst. There are 3 more, he said finally. Dormant. Waiting for activation. Kira's chest tightened. Where? 1 in the council chamber, 1 in the prince's private quarters, 1 in the king's study. What do they do? The first compels truth from anyone who speaks within its boundary. The second ensures loyalty from anyone who sleeps within its range. The third, he paused, smiled again. The third is insurance. Against what? Against failure. If I am executed, the inscription in the king's study will activate. And anyone with royal blood who enters that room will die within the hour. Kira's blood ran cold. You bound it to your death. I told you. I have been planning for 20 years. Did you truly believe I would make this easy? The king will never allow you to live just to keep an inscription dormant. Then the king will die, as will his son, as will anyone who carries the royal bloodline. Corvin leaned forward, his chains scraping stone. That is the beauty of Bloodscript, girl. Once an inscription is made, it cannot be unmade without the writer's consent or death. And if I die without consent, my final mark becomes permanent, inescapable. Kira forced herself to breathe, to think past the rage clawing at her throat. Bloodscript can be rewritten, she said. Not by you. You do not have enough blood. Your mother's vial is nearly empty, and Bloodscribe blood cannot be replaced. It must come from the original source. He smiled wider. Which means you are powerless, and I am valuable. You are a traitor. I am a survivor. There is a difference. Kira looked at the vial in her hand, at the few drops of her mother's blood, dark and old and waiting, at the man who had stolen it and used it to kill. Then she made a decision that would have horrified her mother and pleased her in equal measure. You are right, Kira said. I do not have enough of my mother's blood to rewrite your inscriptions. She pulled a small knife from her belt. But I have my own. Corvin stared at the knife, then at Kira. His smile vanished. You would not. I spent 12 years hiding what I am. 12 years letting people think I was nothing, powerless, broken. Kira pressed the blade to her palm. I am tired of hiding. And I am done letting men like you use my mother's memory as a weapon. She cut, not deep, just enough to draw blood, enough to activate the old language sleeping in her veins. The burn behind her eyes flared immediately, hot and bright and hungry. She had not used her gift this way before, not with her own blood fresh and willing. It felt different than reading, stronger, more immediate, more dangerous. Stop, Corvin said, and for the first time his voice carried something other than amusement. You do not know what you are doing. I am rewriting your insurance, Kira said. She let her blood drip onto the stone floor, 3 drops in a careful pattern. Every inscription you made with my mother's blood carries her intent. Her signature. Her bloodline. My blood carries the same signature, which means I can track what you wrote, and I can unmake it. That is not how Bloodscript works. It is exactly how Bloodscript works. You just did not expect me to figure it out. The blood on the floor began to glow, faintly at first, then brighter, silver light spreading from each drop like roots searching for water. The light moved across the stone, through the bars of Corvin's cell, and toward the walls of the keep above. Tracking, searching, finding. Kira closed her eyes and let the blood guide her. Felt it reach toward the inscriptions Corvin had planted like seeds throughout Thornwall. 1 in the council chamber, 1 in the prince's quarters, 1 in the king's study. And beneath them, beneath the surface marks visible only to those who could read Bloodscript, she felt something else, a deeper layer, a hidden command buried so far down that even Corvin might not have known it was there. Kira's eyes snapped open. "You did not write those inscriptions alone," she said. Corvin went pale. "Someone else added to your work? Someone who understands blood script better than you do? Someone who wove a secondary command into your marks without you noticing? That is impossible. I worked alone." "You used preserved blood, old blood, blood that had already been inscribed with intent by its original owner." Kira stepped closer to the bars. "My mother marked her own blood before she died. Marked it so that anyone who used it would carry a trace of her will. You thought you were stealing a tool. You were stealing a trap." Corvin's face went from pale to gray. "What did she write? Protection. For me. For anyone who carried her bloodline." Kira smiled, and it felt sharp. "Every inscription you made with her blood carries a hidden clause. If you try to harm a blood scribe, the mark turns back on you. That is impossible. Tell that to the death mark you wrote on Prince Kalen. Tell me why it spread from him to you. Tell me why your wrist burned when you touched the preserved blood." Kira held up her bleeding palm. "My mother knew what you were, what you would do. She prepared for it, and you walked into her final inscription thinking you were clever." Corvin lunged at the bars. The chains caught him halfway. He snarled, all pretense of composure gone. "Then why did she not protect herself?" "Because she chose to protect me instead." The words landed between them like a blade. Kira let them sit there, heavy and sharp and true. Then she turned to the guards. "Bring the king. He needs to see this." Alpha King Dristan arrived within minutes, still wearing his war room clothes, his expression tight with the kind of controlled urgency that made lesser wolves step aside without being asked. He looked at Kira's bleeding palm first, then at the silver light still spreading across the stone floor, then at Corvin, chained and furious and suddenly far less certain of his leverage. "Explain," the king said. Kira did, quickly, efficiently, laying out what she had discovered about Corvin's inscriptions, about her mother's hidden protection, about the secondary commands woven into blood that Corvin had believed was inert. When she finished, the king was silent for a long moment. Then he looked at Corvin with an expression that made the physician press back against the stone wall of his cell. "You thought you could blackmail the crown," the king said. "You thought you could hold my son's life hostage and force me to keep you alive." "It would have worked," Corvin spat. "Without the girl, you would have had no choice. Without the girl, my son would be dead, and you would already be executed. Alara Velthane saved my son 12 years after her death. That is a debt I will not forget." He turned to Kira. "Can you dismantle his inscriptions?" "Yes, Your Majesty, but it will take time, and it will require more blood." "Yours?" "Yes." "How much?" Kira looked at her bleeding palm, at the silver light still glowing faintly on the stone. "Enough to hurt, not enough to kill." The king's expression shifted. "Not softer exactly, but something close to it. You do not have to do this. I can order the council to find another solution." "There is no other solution. Blood script answers to blood, mine or my mother's, and hers is nearly gone." "Then use the royal healers. Let them monitor you. If you take too much—" "I will not take too much. My mother taught me how to measure, how to balance, how to survive what the language takes from me." Kira met his gaze. "I know what I am doing." The king studied her for a moment longer. Then he nodded. "Do it, but not alone. I will have guards with you, healers on standby, and if anything goes wrong, it will not go wrong." "If anything goes wrong," he repeated, his voice dropping into the tone that made kingdoms obey, "you will stop immediately. That is not a request." Kira felt something strange tighten in her chest. Not fear, not anger, something warmer, something that felt dangerously close to trust. "Yes, Your Majesty," she said. She dismantled Corvin's inscriptions over the next 12 hours, working through the night with guards at her back and healers hovering nearby, with expressions that suggested they were torn between fascination and horror. The first inscription, the one in the council chamber, was straightforward. Kira found it hidden in the decorative border of a tapestry hanging behind the head counselor's seat. The words were written small, almost invisible unless you knew how to look. She cut her palm again, let 3 drops of blood fall onto the threads, and spoke the countermand quietly enough that only the guards heard her. The tapestry shuddered once. The inscription dissolved. The compulsion to speak truth only when commanded was broken. The second inscription, in Prince Kaelin's quarters, was more complex. It had been woven into the stitching of his pillow, hidden so thoroughly that even the royal household staff had not noticed. This one was designed to ensure loyalty, to make the prince trust anyone who gave him orders, to turn him into a pawn without him ever knowing he had been moved. Kira felt sick as she dismantled it, felt the weight of what Corvin had tried to do, not just murder, control, ownership. The prince had been sleeping on a pillow designed to steal his will. She burned the pillow after she broke the inscription, watched it turn to ash in the fireplace while Prince Kaelin watched from his doorway, pale and quiet and trying very hard to look brave. "Thank you," he said when the fire died down. Kira looked at him, at the boy who would be king, who had almost been turned into a puppet, who was still standing despite everything that had been done to him. "You are welcome, Your Highness." The third inscription, the one in the king's study, was the hardest. Not because it was more complex, because it was personal. Corvin had written it directly onto the desk where the king signed his orders, hidden in the grain of the wood, invisible unless you knew where to look. Designed to activate the moment Corvin died, turning the desk into a death trap that would kill anyone with royal blood who touched it. Kira knelt beside the desk with her bleeding palm pressed to the wood and felt the rage in the inscription, felt Corvin's intent, his hatred, his final act of spite woven into every letter. And beneath it, she felt something else. Her mother's protection, still there, still active, still waiting. Ilara Velthane had marked her own blood, knowing it would be used against her daughter's people, had woven a countermand into the very substance of her being, a final act of defiance that would outlive her by decades. Kira felt tears burn behind her eyes. "Thank you, Mother," she whispered. Then she rewrote Corvin's inscription, not to dismantle it, to redirect it. If Corvin died, the mark would activate, but instead of killing the king, it would simply fade, dissolve, return to the wood as if it had never been written. It was a small mercy, a final kindness her mother had built into the blood Corvin had stolen. Kira finished the rewriting and sat back on her heels, exhausted. Her palm had stopped bleeding, but the burn behind her eyes remained sharp and bright and refusing to fade. "It is done," she said. The king, who had been standing by the window watching the entire process, crossed to where she knelt. He looked at the desk, then at Kira's pale face, then at her bleeding palm. "You should rest," he said. "I should finish my report. The report can wait. You look like you are about to collapse." "I am fine." "You are not fine. You are exhausted. You have bled more in the past 12 hours than most people bleed in a year, and you are shaking." Kira looked at her hands. He was right. They were trembling despite her attempts to hold them steady. "I will rest after I confirm the inscriptions are fully dismantled," she said. "They are dismantled. I can feel it." The king's voice softened just slightly. "The air in this room has changed. Whatever Corvin wove into my desk is gone." "How can you tell?" "Because I have lived in this study for 10 years. I know how it feels when someone is watching, when something is waiting." He looked at her directly. "It is not waiting anymore." Kira met his gaze, saw the truth there, saw the relief he was not saying aloud. "Then it is finished," she said. "No, it is not. Your Majesty?" Corvin had help. Someone authorized the blood collection. Someone gave him access. Someone wanted this to happen. The king crossed to his desk, the one Kira had just disarmed. "And I intend to find out who." Kira pushed herself to her feet, swayed once, and felt the king's hand close around her elbow before she could fall. The contact burned, not painfully, just intensely. His hand was warm, steady, strong enough to hold her upright without making her feel weak for needing it. "Careful," he said. "I am fine," Kira said automatically. "You have said that 3 times in the past hour. It stops being convincing after the second time." Despite herself, Kira felt her mouth twitch, almost a smile. "Are you accusing me of lying, Your Majesty?" "I am accusing you of being stubborn. There is a difference." He guided her to the chair beside his desk. Not the one behind it, the one that said king. The one beside it, the one that said equal. Kira sat before she could think too hard about what that meant. The king remained standing, his hand still on her elbow, his expression caught somewhere between concern and calculation. "You saved my son twice now," he said. "Once from the death mark, once from being turned into someone he was not. I did what any blood scribe would do. No, you did what you chose to do. There is a difference. He released her elbow slowly, as if testing whether she would remain upright without his support. And I am in your debt. You owe me nothing, Your Majesty. I owe you everything. He stepped back, putting space between them, but his gaze did not leave her face. My son, my crown, my life. All of it would be gone if you had chosen to stay hidden. I could not stay hidden, not after your son called my name. He called your mother's name. Celine, not Kira. Kira went still. You remember that. I remember everything that happened in that throne room, including the moment you decided to save us instead of yourself. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The study was quiet around them, filled only with the sound of their breathing and the faint crackle of the fire in the hearth. Then the king said, quietly, "Why did you choose us?" Kira looked at him, at the exhaustion in his eyes, at the weight he carried, at the man behind the crown who had just admitted he owed her everything. "Because you gave me a choice," she said, "and no one has given me a choice in 12 years. The king's expression changed. Something shifted behind his eyes, softening in a way that made him look less like a king and more like a man who had just realized he had been seen. "Then I will keep giving you choices," he said, "for as long as you are under my protection. And when I am no longer under your protection, then I will hope you choose to stay anyway." The words hung between them, heavier than Kira expected. She looked at the king, at the man who had changed the law for her, who had trusted her with his son's life, who was looking at her now as if she were more than a tool or a threat, as if she were a person worth knowing. "I should go," Kira said, because staying felt dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with blood script or treason. "You should rest," the king corrected. "But if you insist on working, at least let the healers tend to your hand first." Kira looked at her palm. The cut had stopped bleeding, but it still stung, and her fingers were starting to stiffen. "All right," she said. The king nodded, stepped aside, let her pass. But as she reached the door, he said her name. Not her false name, not Kira Ashwood. Celine. She turned. He was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Something between respect and curiosity, and the kind of careful interest that made her pulse quicken despite herself. "Thank you," he said simply. Kira did not know what to say to that, so she simply nodded and left before she could say something foolish. Like the truth. Like the fact that she had not just chosen to save them. She had chosen him, and that was a far more dangerous secret than any bloodline could ever be. It was smaller than she expected, warmer, lined with books rather than weapons, though a sword hung above the fireplace, old and plain and well-used. The king stood by the window, looking out at the keep's courtyard. He did not turn when she entered. "Kaelin is healing well," he said. "The physicians say he will recover fully." "I am glad, Your Majesty. He asked about you. Wanted to thank you properly. I told him to wait." Kira said nothing. The king turned to face her. In the firelight, his expression was less controlled, warier, older. "Corvin will be executed. The council has agreed. For attempted regicide, for treason, for the misuse of preserved remains. And the blood archives? Being destroyed. All of them. Every vial. Every record." He paused. "Including your mother's." Something in Kira's chest loosened. Not grief, exactly. Not relief. Something between them. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet. There are complications." Of course there were. There were always complications when kingdoms changed their minds about who deserved to be killed. "The law prohibiting blood scribes was written by my father," the king said. "He believed your people were too dangerous to live, that the old language gave you too much power over those who could not read it." He was not wrong. The king's gaze sharpened. "You think you are dangerous?" "I think language is dangerous. Intent is dangerous. Blood magic is dangerous. People like me were killed because we could rewrite reality if we chose to. That is not a power anyone should have without consequence. And yet you did not rewrite Corvin's will. You only changed his confession. Because forcible rewriting is enslavement. My mother taught me that. Blood script can change words, but it cannot change choice. The moment you try, you become the thing your enemies claim you are." The king studied her for a long moment. "Your mother was wise. My mother is dead." "Yes, she is. and I cannot undo that. He crossed to his desk, opened a drawer, and removed a folded parchment sealed with black wax. But I can do this. He held it out. Kira took it with shaking hands, broke the seal, unfolded it. Inside, written in formal script, was a royal pardon. For Alara Velthane, posthumously cleared of all charges. For Kira Ashwood, born Kira Velthane, cleared of concealment and granted full recognition as a free citizen of Thornwall Kingdom. And beneath that, a second notation. Appointment to the position of Royal Bloodscribe, subject to oath of service. Kira looked up. You want me to serve the crown? I want you to help me prevent what happened to Kaelin from happening again. Someone authorized the collection of Bloodscribe blood. Someone wanted that archive preserved. I need to know who. And I need someone who can read the old records to find out. There are no other Bloodscribes left. I know. If I swear service, I am bound by Bloodscript oath. I cannot break it without dying. I know. And if the person who authorized the collection is powerful enough to hide for 20 years, they will not take kindly to being exposed. I know. Kira looked at the parchment in her hands, at her mother's name, finally written without the word traitor beside it, at her own name, recognized, official, real. Why? She asked. Why offer this? The king was silent for a moment. Then he said simply, because you saved my son, because you could have run, could have hidden, could have let Kaelin die and disappeared into the archives and never been found. But you did not. You chose truth. And I have spent my entire reign trying to rule a kingdom built on my father's lies. I am tired of it. Kira met his gaze, saw the weariness there, the weight, the same exhaustion she had carried for 12 years. If I accept, she said, I want access to all the execution records, not just Bloodscribes, everyone executed during the Crimson Trials. I want to know who else might have blood stored, who else might be at risk. Done. And I want my mother's name restored to the public record. Not hidden, not erased. Written clearly as someone who served the kingdom before it turned on her. Done. And I want a promise that no one will ever use Bloodscript to force confession again. That if I serve by choice, not by command. The king inclined his head. You have my word, and I will put it in writing. No forced confession, no compulsion. Your gift is yours. Kira looked at the parchment again. At the pardon that would never bring her mother back. At the appointment that would put her in the same position her mother had died refusing. But her mother had refused because the old king had demanded she burn the archives, demanded she erase the history of her people. This king was asking her to preserve it, to investigate it, to use it. The difference felt important. I accept, Kira said. The king smiled. It was small, brief, but real. Then welcome to the court, Royal Bloodscribe Kira Velthane. Kira left the study with the parchment folded carefully in her pocket, and her mother's name no longer a secret she had to bury. The hallway outside was quiet. The guards at the door nodded to her as she passed. One even stepped aside without being asked. It was a small thing, barely noticeable. But Kira noticed. For 12 years, people had looked through her, around her, past her. Now they looked at her. She was not certain she liked it, but she would learn. The archive wing was dark when she returned. Master Halven had left a lamp burning on her desk, a small kindness he had never offered before. Kira lit it, sat down, pulled out the folded parchment with the list of preserved blood records, and began to read. Her mother had taught her that every word in Bloodscript carried intent, that language was not neutral, that every inscription, every mark, every name held power because someone had chosen to write it. The names on this list had been written by someone who believed Bloodscribe blood was a resource, a tool, something to be collected and stored for future use. Kira intended to find out who, and when she did, she would rewrite their intent into truth, because that was what Bloodscribes did. They took the words the powerful had written and made them mean something else. Outside, the keep settled into night. Guards changed shifts. Nobles returned to their chambers. The throne room stood empty, the dais clean, the marble floor scrubbed of all evidence that a prince had almost died there. But Kira remembered, and she would make certain the kingdom remembered too, not as a warning, as a promise that the old language was not dead, that the blood remembered, and that the daughter of Alara Velthane had learned to read the words her mother had died protecting. 3 weeks later, Kira stood in the royal council chamber and presented her findings. But before that day arrived, there was the night the council tried to stop her. It happened on the 7th day after Corvin's final confession, after Kira had dismantled his inscriptions, but before she had finished tracing the Blood Archive's origins. She was working late in the sublevel, alone except for 2 guards who had grown comfortable enough to play dice by the door rather than watch her every move. She heard them stop playing a moment before the footsteps began. 3 sets, coming down the stairs with the kind of deliberate weight that suggested this was not a casual visit. Kira straightened from the archive table, her hand moving instinctively to the knife at her belt, the one she kept sharp now, the one she had used to cut her palms 6 times in the past week. Councilmember Aldrich entered first, his black robes immaculate, his silver chain of office gleaming in the lamplight. Behind him came Councilmember Petra, sharp-eyed and precise, and Councilmember Tom, broad-shouldered and silent as stone. The guards at the door rose immediately. "Council members, we were not expecting." "Leave us," Aldrich said. The guards hesitated. "Our orders are to stay with the Bloodscribe, my lord." "Your orders are to obey the council. Leave. Now." The guards looked at each other, then at Kira. She shook her head once, a small motion, but they saw it. "We stay," the first guard said. Aldrich's face darkened. "This is council business, private business. Your presence is neither required nor welcome." "Our orders come from the king, my lord." And he was very clear. The guard's hand moved to his sword hilt. Not threatening, just ready. "We stay." For a moment, Kira thought Aldrich might press the issue, thought he might order them out, escalate this into something uglier. But Petra laid a hand on his arm, a gentle restraint, and Aldrich's expression smoothed into something that resembled politeness but felt nothing like it. "Very well," he said. "If the Bloodscribe requires an audience for this conversation, so be it." He turned his attention to Kira. "We need to discuss your investigation." "What about it?" "It has gone on long enough. The council has reviewed your findings. We agree that Corvin Thale acted with treason. He will be executed. Justice will be served. There is no need to continue digging through old records." Kira set down the parchment she had been copying. "I am not digging. I am documenting. There is a difference." "Semantics," Aldrich said dismissively. "The point remains. You have found Corvin's guilt. The matter is closed." "The matter is not closed. Corvin had help. Someone authorized the Blood Archive. Someone gave him access. Someone wanted." Yes, Petra interrupted. "We have heard your theories, but theories are not evidence, and stirring up accusations without proof serves no purpose except to create instability." "Instability," Kira repeated slowly. "You are concerned about instability, not about the fact that someone in the royal court helped a physician try to murder the crown prince." "We are concerned about the kingdom," Tom said, speaking for the first time. His voice was low, steady, the kind of voice that did not need to be raised to carry weight. "And about a young woman who has suffered greatly and may be seeing conspiracies where there are only tragedies." Kira went very still. "You think I am imagining this?" "We think you are grieving," Petra said, and her voice was softer now, almost kind. "Your mother was executed. You have carried that pain for 12 years. And now, with access to the records, with the power to rewrite what was done to her, it is understandable that you might overreach." "I am not overreaching." "You are pursuing ghosts," Aldrich said bluntly. Corvin acted alone. He used old resources left over from the late king's reign. There is no grand conspiracy. There is no hidden enemy. There is only a bitter physician who wanted power and chose the worst possible path to claim it. Kira looked at the 3 of them, at their expressions of polite concern and careful dismissal, at the way they stood between her and the archive, as if their presence alone could stop her from continuing. "You do not want me to find the truth," she said. "We want you to accept what has already been found," Aldrich corrected, "and to stop creating problems where none exist." "Problems," Kira repeated. She picked up the parchment from the table, the one she had been copying when they arrived. "Is this a problem?" She held it out. Aldrich took it with visible reluctance, scanned the first few lines. His expression did not change, but Kira saw the moment he understood what he was reading. This is a supply ledger, he said. Yes, from 20 years ago, signed by the royal steward, authorizing the purchase of 300 glass vials, 12 crates of preservation solution, and silver clasps for archival storage. Supplies for a medical archive. There is nothing unusual about that, except the order was placed 3 weeks before the first Bloodscribe execution during the Crimson Trials. 3 weeks before anyone knew there would be blood to preserve. Kira stepped closer. Someone knew. Someone ordered supplies in advance. Someone planned the entire archive before a single Bloodscribe was arrested. Petra's face went carefully blank. That proves nothing. The steward could have been preparing for multiple uses. The timing could be coincidence. Coincidence, Kira said. Like the coincidence that the steward who signed this order is Garen Vale. The same Garen Vale who has been sitting in the cells for a week refusing to name his accomplice. Garen has been questioned extensively, Tom said. He has admitted his role in the plot with Corvin. He has given no indication that anyone else was involved. Because no one has asked the right questions. Because no one wants to follow the evidence. Because there is no evidence! Aldrich's control finally cracked. His voice rose, sharp and angry. You have a supply order and a theory. That is not proof. That is desperation. Then why are you here? Kira asked quietly. If I am chasing ghosts and finding nothing, why do you care? Why 3 council members in the middle of the night to tell me to stop? Silence. The guards shifted beside the door, hands still on their sword hilts, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this conversation had turned. Then Petra said very softly, Because you are making the court nervous, child. You are looking at old records, old decisions, old names, and people fear what you might find. Should they fear it? That depends on what you are looking for. Truth or vengeance? Kira met her gaze, saw the calculation there, the careful measuring of a woman who had survived decades in court politics by knowing when to push and when to protect. I am looking for truth, Kira said. Whether it leads to vengeance is not my choice. It is yours. Aldrich's hand clenched on the parchment. For a moment, Kira thought he might tear it, destroy the evidence, pretend this conversation had never happened. But he did not. He simply placed it back on the table with exaggerated care and said, You are playing a dangerous game, Bloodscribe. I am doing my job. The job your king appointed me to do. The king, Aldrich said, with barely concealed contempt, is young, idealistic. He believes in justice and truth, and all the shining principles that sound beautiful in speeches but break against reality. He does not understand how kingdoms survive, but we do, and we are telling you, for your own protection, to stop digging. Or what? Or you will find something you do not want to find, and when you do, there will be no one left to protect you. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Kira felt it settle on her skin, cold and certain. I have the king's protection, she said. For now, Petra agreed. But kings change their minds, courts change their loyalties, and bloodscribes, no matter how useful, are still outlaws in the eyes of many. One mistake, one overreach, one accusation that cannot be proven, and that protection will vanish. Is that a warning or a promise? It is advice, Tom said, from people who have served this kingdom far longer than you have been alive. Take it, or do not. But do not say you were not given the chance to walk away. Then the 3 of them turned and left. Their footsteps echoed up the stairs, measured and unhurried, as if they had simply come to discuss scheduling rather than threaten a royal appointee. The guards exhaled in unison. Should we report this to the king? The first guard asked. Kira looked at the parchment on the table, at the supply order that proved someone had planned the blood archive before the executions began, at the evidence that 3 council members had just tried to bury. Yes, she said, immediately. Alpha King Driston did not summon her to his study. He came to the sub-level himself, still in his sleeping clothes, a sword belted over them, his expression the kind of cold fury that made empires reconsider their choices. Tell me, he said. Kira did. Everything. The supply order, the timeline, the fact that someone had known executions were coming before they were announced, the fact that the council had tried to stop her from investigating further. When she finished, the king was silent for a long moment. Then he looked at the guards. Who threatened her? Council members Aldrich, Petra, and Tom, Your Majesty. Did they lay hands on her? No, Your Majesty. But they ordered us to leave. We refused. Good. The king's gaze moved to Kira. Did they harm you? No, Your Majesty. They simply suggested I should stop investigating. For my own protection. Protection. The king's voice went dangerously soft. They came to a royal appointee in a secured archive and told her to stop doing the work I commanded her to do. For her own protection. Yes, Your Majesty. And they did this without notifying me, without requesting permission, without any authority except their own. Yes, Your Majesty. The king crossed to the archive table, picked up the supply order, read it slowly, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at Kira with eyes that had gone from cold to burning. Do you believe the council is involved in the conspiracy? He asked. I believe someone in power authorized the blood archive. I believe that person is still in the court. And I believe the council knows who it is. I believe the council knows who it is. I believe that person is still in the court. I believe that person is still in the court. I believe that person is still in the court. I believe that person is still in the court. I believe that person is still in the court. I believe that person is still in the court. I believe that person is still in the court. I believe that person is still in the court. I believe that person is still in the court. I believe that person is still in the court. I believe that person is still in the court. I believe that person is still in the court. I believe that person is still in the court. Proof? Not yet, but I will find it. And if the proof leads to someone the council wants protected, someone with influence, power, connections, Kira met his gaze. Then I will present it anyway. That is my job. That is what you appointed me to do. Even if it costs you the council's favor, I never had their favor. Even if it puts you in danger, I have been in danger since the day I was born, Your Majesty. This is nothing new. The king studied her for a moment longer. Then he turned to the guards. From this moment forward, no one enters this archive without my written permission. No council members, no scholars, no one. If anyone tries, you have my authority to refuse them. If they insist, arrest them. The guard's eyes widened. Your Majesty, that is an order. Yes, Your Majesty. The king looked back at Kira. You will continue your investigation. You will have full access to any records you require. And if anyone threatens you again, you will report it to me immediately, not after. During. Is that clear? Yes, Your Majesty. Good. He started toward the stairs, then paused, looked back. Kira. She blinked. He had never used her first name before. Always blood scribe or royal appointee or occasionally that girl when he was particularly frustrated. Your Majesty, they are afraid of you, he said quietly. Not because of what you have found, because of what you represent. You are proof that the old laws were wrong. That blood scribes were executed for no reason except fear. If you succeed, if you prove the conspiracy runs deeper than one physician, the council will have to answer for their complicity. They will have to admit they served a system that murdered innocent people. That is what they fear, not you. The truth you carry. Kira's throat tightened. Then I will make certain the truth is heard. The king's expression softened, just slightly. I know you will. That is why I chose you. Then he left, and Kira stood alone in the sub-level with two guards who looked at her with new respect and a supply order that proved everything she had suspected. Someone in power had known. Someone in power had planned. Someone in power was still hiding. And Kira Velthane, daughter of Elara, last blood scribe in the kingdom, was going to find them. No matter what it cost. The room was full. The king sat at the head of the table. Prince Kalen sat beside him, pale but steady, his eyes bright with the kind of curiosity that made tutors nervous. Council members filled the remaining seats. Guards lined the walls. And Corvin Thale, in chains, sat at the far end of the table under watch. He had finally given up the name. Not willingly, not through torture, through something simpler. Kira had found a letter in the blood archive, written in blood script, addressed to Corvin from someone who signed only with a mark. The mark of the royal steward. Garen Vale, the man who managed every transaction in the keep, who oversaw the treasury, who had access to every record, every ledger, every hidden corner of Thornwall. and who, according to the letter, had been the one to authorize the preservation of Bloodscribe blood after every execution. Not for research. For leverage. Bloodscript could be used to bind oaths, to enforce contracts, to create marks that could not be broken without death. Garin had been building an archive of control, a library of blood that could be used to compel anyone, anytime, if he ever needed to secure power in the kingdom. Corvin had simply been his tool, willing, paid, promised a position of greater influence once the prince was dead and the succession unstable. It was efficient, cruel, and very, very illegal. The king had arrested Garin before dawn. The steward had tried to run, had gotten as far as the keep's outer gate before guards caught him. Now he sat beside Corvin, chained, silent, his face gray with the understanding that there was no talking his way out of this. Kira stood at the center of the table and laid out the evidence. The letters, the ledgers, the blood records, the inscriptions Garin had commissioned and never used. 20 years of conspiracy, 20 years of preparing for a moment when he could control the throne. He had simply run out of time. The sentence is death, the king said when Kira finished. For both of you, for treason, for conspiracy, for the attempted murder of the crown prince. Garin said nothing. Corvin laughed. It was a bitter sound. You think killing us ends this? There are others. You will never find them all. Then I will keep looking, the king said simply. He turned to Kira. Is there anything else? Kira hesitated. Then she pulled one final parchment from her stack. There is one more name, Your Majesty. In the oldest records, someone who authorized the first collection of Bloodscribe blood, before the Crimson Trials, before the executions. She laid the parchment on the table. The king looked at it. His expression did not change, but something in his posture stiffened. My father, he said quietly. Yes, Your Majesty. The council shifted. Someone cleared their throat. No one spoke. The king picked up the parchment, read it, then set it down carefully, as if it might burn. He signed the order himself. Yes, Your Majesty. To preserve the blood of executed bloodscribes, for alchemical research and strategic advantage. Yes, Your Majesty. The king looked at Kira. You could have hidden this. I could have, but you asked for truth. And my mother died because your father hid his. For a long moment, the king said nothing. Then he stood, took the parchment, and walked to the fireplace at the side of the chamber. He held it over the flames. My father built this kingdom on fear, on control, on the belief that some people were too dangerous to live. He was wrong, and I will not continue his work. He dropped the parchment into the fire, watched it burn. Then he turned back to the council. Effective immediately, the blood archives are dissolved. All preserved remains will be returned to the families of the deceased, or, where no family survives, buried with honor. Bloodscript prohibition is formally repealed, and the royal position of bloodscribe is reinstated. He looked at Kira, with full authority to investigate, record, and preserve the truth of what was done, so that it is never forgotten and never repeated. The council erupted, arguments, protests, demands for procedure. The king let them shout, let them rage, let them exhaust themselves. Then, when the room finally quieted, he said simply, The law is changed. Adapt. And that was the end of it. Garin and Corvin were executed 3 days later, publicly, with full testimony read aloud so that everyone in the kingdom understood what they had done. Kira did not attend. She had no desire to watch men die, even men who had tried to kill a child. Instead, she stood in the royal cemetery in front of a new grave marker that had been placed that morning. Elara Veltane, royal bloodscribe, executed without cause, honored in death. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. Kira placed a hand on the stone, felt the cold granite under her palm, felt the weight of 12 years lift just slightly. I kept my head down, she said quietly. Like you told me, I survived. I stayed quiet. I learned their language and used it to become invisible. The wind moved through the cemetery, cold and clean. But I am not hiding anymore. Footsteps behind her. Kira turned. Alpha King Dristan Ashbourne stood at the edge of the graves, alone, no guards, no ceremony. I thought you might be here, he said. Kira said nothing. He crossed to stand beside her. looked at the grave marker. She deserved better. Yes, I cannot give her justice. She is gone. I know, but I can give you a choice. He looked at Kira. You do not have to serve. The position is real. The authority is real. But if you choose to walk away, I will honor that. You have earned your freedom. Use it however you wish. Kira studied him. The weariness in his face, the weight he carried, the way he stood like a man who had learned to hold too much and was only now realizing it might break him. Why did you change the law? She asked. Because Kaelin is alive, and if I had followed my father's law, he would be dead. That is reason enough. And the council? They will fight you. Let them. He smiled, and it was a tired thing, but real. I am tired of building kingdoms on graves. If they cannot accept that, they can leave. Kira looked back at her mother's grave, at the words carved in stone, at the name that had been hidden for 12 years and was finally visible. I will stay, she said, not because I owe you, not because of the law, but because my mother spent her life trying to preserve the truth, and I will finish what she started. The king inclined his head. Then I am honored to have you. He turned to leave, paused, looked back. One more thing. Your Majesty, Kaelin wants to learn blood script. He believes it is important, that if he is to be king one day, he should understand what his grandfather tried to erase. Kira blinked. You want me to teach him? If you are willing. He is the crown prince. He is a boy who nearly died because powerful men treated knowledge as a weapon. I would prefer he learn to treat it as a tool. Kira considered that. Considered the boy who had sat up on the dais and thanked her with simple honesty, who had looked at her without fear or disgust or suspicion, who had called her she knows and been right. I will teach him, she said. The king smiled. Good. He will be insufferable about it. Fair warning. Then he left, and Kira stood alone in the cemetery, her hand still on her mother's grave, and felt, for the first time in 12 years, like she might be able to breathe. The old language had not died. The blood had remembered. And the daughter of Alara Velthane had learned to rewrite the words that kings use to bury truth. That felt like enough. For now, Prince Kaelin proved to be a remarkably stubborn student. He asked too many questions, interrupted constantly, got distracted by irrelevant details, and refused to give up even when the blood script made his eyes water and his hands shake. Kira found him unexpectedly easy to teach, because he listened, and when she explained why certain words could not be used without consequence, he did not argue. He simply nodded and asked what the consequence was. Most people did not ask that question. They sat in the archive most afternoons. Kaelin bent over a practice parchment, carefully copying letters while Kira corrected his form. This one hurts, he said, wincing as he traced a particularly complex mark. That is because it is a binding word. It resists being written by someone who does not carry the bloodline. Will it always hurt? Yes. Good. Kira looked up. Good? Kaelin met her gaze, serious for once. If it did not hurt, people would use it carelessly. The pain is a reminder. He sounded older than 13 when he said that. Older and warier and a little bit broken in the way that people who had nearly died sometimes were. You are learning quickly, Kira said. My father says I should learn everything. That way I will not make the same mistakes he did. Your father is wise. My father is tired. Kaelin set down his pen. He tries to hide it, but I can tell. He carries too much. That is what kings do. Is that what blood scribes do too? Carry things? Kira paused. Considered the question. Considered the weight she had carried for 12 years and only just set down. Yes, she said finally. We carry the words no one else can read, the truths no one else wants to see, the histories that have been buried. That sounds heavy. It is. Is that why you stayed, even after my father gave you a choice? Kira looked at him, at the boy who would be king one day, who had almost died because powerful men had decided he was expendable, who was learning blood script not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. I stayed because running did not work. I hid for 12 years. It did not make me safe. It made me invisible. And invisible people do not get to choose what happens to them. Kaelin thought about that. Then he picked up his pen. Then I am glad you stayed. Why? Because if you had not, I would be dead, and my father would be grieving, and Corvin and Garen would still be free. He looked up at her, his gray eyes clear and steady. You saved me, not just my life, my father's heart. He does not say it. But I know. Kira's throat tightened. You are welcome. They worked in silence after that. Kaelin copying letters. Kira correcting mistakes. The archive quiet around them, filled with books and old parchment, and the slow accumulation of knowledge that outlived kings. Outside, the kingdom moved forward. Laws were changed, records were corrected, names were restored, and in the royal cemetery, Ilara Velthane's grave stood clean and honored, no longer hidden, no longer erased. Kira visited it once a week, brought flowers sometimes, mostly just stood there and let herself remember. Her mother had died so that Kira could survive. Kira had survived so that her mother's name could be cleared. It was not a fair trade. It was not justice, but it was something. And for the daughter of a blood scribe, something was better than silence. The old language had survived. The blood had remembered. And the kingdom that had tried to drown them both was learning, slowly, to let them speak.